Hi, I'm Francis Rooney, former ambassador to the Holy See, and I'm talking with Dr. Sky here on ABC 77, broadcasting to many areas about very important subjects like our fundamental freedoms, American exceptionalism and challenges to it, and our individual rights and liberties, and the protection of our country from its adversaries.
Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Dr. Sky Experience, proudly heard on Talk Radio 77 WABC. We like to call it the crown jewel of radio. The iconic 77 Talk Radio WABC, beaming out of New York City, the nation, the world, and the cosmos, heard in well over 173 countries and all 50 states, literally the nation's most powerful radio station, as we talk about great subjects. Normally, our conversation, folks, as you know, is about science and technology. We also talk about American exceptionalism and people who know much more about that. Today, a brief but important interview with former Ambassador Francis Rooney, who represented Florida's 19th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives from 2017 to 2021. And from 2005 to 2008, he served as the United States Ambassador to the Holy See, appointed by President George W. Bush, and subsequently wrote a book about diplomacy and the U.S. Holy See relationship, titled appropriately, The Global Vatican. Ambassador, welcome to our program today, talking about so much in this very charged political season. How are you today, sir? And again, thank you for joining us.
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to talk to somebody in the realm of being an ambassador. And I think for those out there that have no idea, how does one become an ambassador? If you could explain that role to us, I think that's quite fascinating, if you'd be kind enough to tell us more about it.
Well, I mean, it's important to know the president because he picks them.
Absolutely.
And the most important post or the most important picks that the president has.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And in today's troubled times, we find ourselves moving toward this great election that many people either they scratch their head or they're saying, wait, what's going on with the current administration? And also talking about President Donald John Trump as he hopes to change the country for the better. And many people, of course, have opinions about that. But what I'd like to know is just going over just a little bit more about being the ambassador to the Holy See. I understand, if I'm correct, the time that you come on board in October of 2005, there was also a transition in the papacy. We found out the sad passing of Pope John Paul II, and it was what? Pope Benedict XVI, who you obviously worked around and I'm sure had access to. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we were very fortuitous to be there with Pope Benedict, and our country was fortuitous to have him because he was very interested in the role the Holy See could play diplomatically in the world, using their unique position as a non-territorial sovereign. And he was very fond of the United States. We spoke often about the First Amendment, our freedoms of speech, freedom of religion, and those were things that don't exist in Europe. And he was a very true friend of the United States and was always willing to pick up some of our causes, like when the Islamic fundamentalism stuff was just starting up, then he picked up our cause and used his bully pulpit to help call for tolerance and interreligious dialogue and reformation of many of the Muslim tenets, which are inconsistent with the 21st century.
Well, it's also fascinating, and you know so much better, but I think our listeners out there, he was a German national citizen. Is that correct? Kind of different than what you saw many popes being of course, Italian descent.
Yeah, the Italians kind of think it's their club. Yeah, Pope Benedict was a good German from Bavaria and was true to his German roots, very disciplined, and but a true friend of the United States. And I think
he was also known, as you know, as Pope Emeritus, and his motto simply was cooperators of the truth. But we'll get back to that story a little bit later. But I wanted to ask you to comment in depth, if we can, in the short time we have with you here today. A political column here entitled, under the defense category, What a Kamala Harris Foreign Policy Would Look Like. Let's go from the perspective of saying that if she did become president of the United States, for those of you that would, jump up for joy for that, and others that would run for the door, can you give us, Ambassador, just some key points about how you feel this individual would handle certain situations in the world? And let's start, of course, with what's going on with Israel, because obviously the most horrific event by Hamas back almost a year ago, as we know, October 7th, a very sad situation. My personal opinion doesn't matter as much, but I do believe that the United States should not be forcing decisions onto Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think the Israelis know how to fight. But sadly, unfortunately, they do need our support for the arms and weapons. Talk to us about the whole situation in the Middle East and what you would see a Kamala Harris administration. How would she deal with Israel?
Yeah, well, first of all, Biden's messed it up by his wanting it both ways. You can't always have it both ways. You've got to have winners and losers. And he talks out of both sides of his mouth and doesn't help Israel and doesn't really help the Palestinians either. He just muddles through. We need a clear foreign policy that respects the fact that Israel is our ally in the Middle East and that Hamas attacked them. They didn't attack Hamas. Right. How is it that 2 weeks ago, Hamas kills hostages and the liberal media blames Israel, including the Democrats? I don't understand it. We need a clear defense of Israel. And we need to respect one of the great things that Donald Trump did was bring the Sunni Arabs of Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, etc., into a dialogue with Israel. I mean, there's a chance for a real breakthrough there to reform the Middle East around Sunni Arabs and Israel against the radical Shia Iran sects that are causing all the trouble.
Yes. Very interesting and well said. This is also something that kind of disturbs me too, knowing many of my friends of the Jewish faith and many Americans that are of Jewish faith in the background here in America. This is quite a sad situation because we talk about, or many talk about, a two-state solution. So knowing what a two-state solution would be, Ambassador, describe what you would feel, your own personal opinion on that, and then describe to us what you think a Harris administration would do. That's interesting.
Well, the two-state solution is still the aspirational goal that's been there since 1948 or something. Mm-hmm. But the Arab side, the Palestinian side, has not shown that they can operate a state. I mean, I don't care what kind of state we give them, they can't operate. The only reason Hamas came into existence is that the Palestinian Authority was so corrupt and wasn't picking up the trash, wasn't providing electricity, couldn't run a country, that everybody turned their hands and said, okay, let's try these new guys. And lo and behold, they become just as corrupt and militant as the PA. So I don't know where we go with a two-state solution until we get some maturity and respect for life out of the other side.
Well, the anger that the Israelis have, rightfully so, against Hamas. I mean, so many people from the Israeli side say they simply just want to wipe them off the face of the earth, which I certainly can't blame them for the horrific things. And when I think, Ambassador, more people, this is my opinion, of course, interjected here from time to time, I think more people need to see the horrific deeds that those individuals did. And there's no excuse for it at all. But the problematic thing is, I think Israel's doing the very best they can. Because tell our audience, if the people are not familiar with what's going on with Hamas and tunnels, they've buried themselves and how do I say that, supported themselves with supplies for a long time. This is a very difficult ground fight. And it's not as easy as many people will think. Your comment on that?
No, it's not. And it takes people need to think about what's really happening here. As you allude, the Hamas and Hezbollah come from an ideology that doesn't respect life. And they use human shields. They put their weapons under hospitals. I remember I was deeply involved in the Hezbollah war in 2007. And they had supply chains back into Syria, and a lot of innocent people are going to get killed because they're sitting on top of strongholds of Hezbollah or Hamas. And the American people didn't say, wait a minute, if it's Hamas or Hezbollah, we're sorry about the casualties, but the blood's not on our hands, and the blood's not on Israel's.
Yes. You know, folks, if you're just joining us, I want to remind you, you're listening to Talk Radio 77 WABC with the Dr. Sky Experience, venturing away from our normal science and technology topics, talking about American exceptionalism, and, of course, people who, of course, serve our country and have served our country in many different roles. Our special guest today is former ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, also former congressman from the Florida area, and he's happy enough to join us today, and we do appreciate it. Primarily trying to focus, at least in this particular short interview, on commentary from the ambassador on a political column about what a Kamala Harris foreign policy would look like. So let's continue along that line. Yeah. The big one out there that many people think, Ambassador, is the Russia-Ukraine situation. I mean, how do you feel the Harris administration, if they were elected, would continue to do either support or not support the war in the Ukraine? This is a never-ending war, it seems.
Well, the first thing I would say is that she has a fundamental debility. She can't make a sentence. And you have to speak clearly in foreign policy and in diplomacy, or you will be misunderstood. You can't have it both ways. And Biden's tried to do that. It hasn't worked. I fear greatly that she will do the same equivocation vis-a-vis Israel, the same sympathy towards terrorists, and in the Ukraine, this blindless support of the Ukraine without any kind of effort to stimulate a solution. And with the Ukraine going into that area to the west, I think they've raised the bar. I think the idea of sending NATO weapons into Russia is a huge change in the conflict that I'm not sure it's in the United States' interest to do that.
I agree. And again, just so people know from this particular host side, I'm more of a conservative thinker. And again, as we have our very special guest, former Ambassador Francis Rooney here on the line today on the Dr. Sky Experience, we're talking with him about commentary on a Politico column, more in a defense area. The question would be, what would a Kamala Harris foreign policy look like? I know we're talking rapid here, sir, but I appreciate your time. But if we can move on to what that area in the Middle East know, we move on to China, another big hotspot. And I think Americans need to wake up to seeing just how aggressive the Chinese military, the Chinese Communist Party is. And what do you feel her administration would or would not do if elected in 2025?
Well, I think China is one area where Biden has been more in sync with Trump. The question becomes with someone like Kamala Harris, who doesn't know anything, and can't really describe anything, is she going to be able to articulate a strong policy that the Chinese will respect? Trump clearly did, and Biden to some extent did. But is she capable of doing that? We have not seen her be able to say anything that is clear and competent that would send the Chinese a message that she means business.
Yes. So if you look at the possibility, and this is a horrific one, and I'm sure military planners have thought out the horrors of a war strategy and war games on this. But in your humble opinion, sir, Ambassador, do you feel that the Chinese will spring on Taiwan? I know that sounds rather naive to people in the know, but obviously they want it back for political reasons and economic reasons. What do you foresee the future like, in your own opinion, with China being aggressive to do like that and take over Taiwan in the short order? And when would it be, in your opinion, if they do?
You know, the Chinese are so complex. You never know what audience they're playing to. I mean, I wonder if the Chinese people really care about Taiwan, or if China's doing this to promote their hegemonic position in the world and doesn't really mean to actualize on it. That's one thing. But on the other hand, I think it's entirely possible that they could get to the point militarily where they could do it if they want.
Yes. Interesting. You know, Ambassador, I've supported President Trump in my days and have done many, many shows on this. Another show that we did for 15 years, called The Call to Rights, about our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our sacred Constitution, and, of course, our Second Amendment rights. But I want to get your opinion as a lifelong Republican in this particular story. Give the listeners of this radio show the very positive reasons why you feel the media is misinterpreting 99% of what President Trump does say, not what he does, and then how we might be able to affect the change where this particular individual goes back to the White House in 2025. What's that message that people may not be hearing correctly from the legacy media, which unfortunately doesn't always get it right?
Right. I think people need to reflect. And I've been reflecting on this a lot. I talk to my family about this, that I'm starting to feel like we live in an authoritarian state. When you look at the media, the liberal media, the way they've distorted everything that is positive for Trump and confuse things which would be negative about Biden or Harris. And when they promote Harris for these ridiculous things, I just wonder if it's propaganda or news. I think it's propaganda. We've crossed some dangerous lines here about freedom of speech that need to be dealt with. And the only way I know to do it is to promote something like the fairness doctrine or something, which gets these people off of advocacy and back to journalism.
Let's also take a moment to criticize. So, you have the floor on this, and I want your opinion. Obviously, Republicans don't walk on water. So what do you think some of their mistakes have been so that we avoid going down the rabbit hole, not only in elections like this, because many people feel, and I don't know necessarily if I agree totally, that the Republican Party is pretty splintered. What's it going to take for us to regain the strength in the Republican Party? And let's hope it's not just about electoral votes on election day, the 270 number. It's also about containing and remaining with the House and Senate.
Yeah, the party's kind of like Scylla and Charybdis, torn between the rocks and the siren. We have the shift from traditional Reagan-Bush Republicans to a lot of people that used to be Democrats that are concerned about the way the country's moved, that are the backbone of Donald Trump's support. So how it's all going to mutate and come together, I'm hopeful that pro-business Republicans will realize that even though the Trump people are a little more populist and a little more anti-free trade than some of the Bush Reagan people might be, that we're all one big tent, and we need to be there against the socialists, quite frankly, that are propagating all these crazy policies that come from Harris. Her record is horrible about that, and they want to take away a lot of freedom that we have. They don't believe in free enterprise and in business. They want the government to do everything, and I don't think that's the future of our country. That's a bad future for our country.
Absolutely. Not what we hope happens, but what do you really think will happen on Election Day? I know that's a very loaded question and so much very difficult to answer, but your opinion, sir, based as we do this interview in the latter part of September 2024, what say you?
Well, I'm an optimist. I'm in the building business and the oil and gas business, and you've got to be an optimist to do that. I think there are a lot of people who are so intimidated by the liberal media, they won't talk about who they're going to vote for, and they're going to vote for Trump.
Yes.
Because they're going to vote for their grandkids, for their pocketbook, for their business, and for the fundamental constitutional rights that Americans hold.
Absolutely. As we conclude the interview in just a few moments, Ambassador, please give us your view on the main topics, content-wise, from Global Vatican. I think that's an interesting story. And again, maybe sometime we can spend more time on focus point on that particular story about being the United States ambassador to the Holy See. So just give us a look-see about some of the ideas that are in that book as we talk about the Global Vatican.
Well, I wrote the book to show the unique role that the Holy See can play in global diplomacy and the alignment between the Holy See and the United States because of our fundamental values. I mean, we're the only two institutions that have human rights and the human condition at the core of our operating ideology. The belief that humans are endowed with inalienable rights, that we have freedom, and that we have the right to pursue our lives by ourselves without the control of a dominating government authority. And that's a wonderful thing. The other thing is the ability of the Holy See to do things in the global diplomatic world because of their lack of bias, if you will, their lack of territory or hegemony. And when properly deployed, they can say things that have more impact than even the United States. And they were a very effective partner when I was ambassador in pushing against Islamic extremism.
Yes. Very well said, but only you would know this, and that's why we're asking our good friend here, Ambassador Francis Rooney. This is interesting. From your time with Pope Benedict XVI to the current person who occupies the papacy, give us a little bit of the philosophy from both sides of the equation, because I think it's only somebody like you that could tell us more about that. Tell us the differences that you see from those two individuals.
Well, I think they're radically different, okay? I mean, Pope Benedict was a theologian. was very conservative, had a deep understanding of the Muslim world, the Quran, the different faiths of the world, deep understanding of our First Amendment and our Constitution, had lectured many times at Catholic universities in the United States, and was a really willing partner to push those things that are important to our diplomacy. Pope Francis is a Latin American Jesuit. He's a liberation theologist who is a lot more focused on social change than he is on diplomatic pursuit of the kind of objectives that are important to our country.
Yes, very well said. And you know something, Ambassador, I didn't realize this, but I'm actually reading this here, is your family generation of owning and maintaining and building the Manhattan Construction Company. I didn't know this. Your company built, as you know better, the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum and the George W. Bush Presidential Center, among that the Texas Rangers Ballpark. So your activities are on large-scale construction and also some symbolic ones to preserve the libraries and memoirs of presidents of the United States. I congratulate you. That's a major undertaking, sir. That's a pretty big nut to crack, I would imagine. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, but if I have 1 second, one thing I'm most proud of is that we are in our fifth generation of family ownership of that company. And that is the kind of thing our country's built on. Our country's built on families and individuals being able to build businesses free of government oppression and to be able to send them down to the next generation. And I don't think the Democrats are for all that.
Well, Ambassador, you said it well, and I do hope that we see President Donald John Trump come back to the White House. Simply this, and I tell this to people, you don't have to, you can hate President Trump, God forbid, but you could hate him all you want. But I think we just need somebody who's a business person who understands this and has been tested. He's not perfect, but the truth of the matter is, I worry a little bit about the other side, and I say that mildly. I worry and am concerned about that, just like you are, sir. There should be never a demonization of creating wealth, and unfortunately, I think that's where this whole thing comes down to. You know, people need to understand that there is opportunity in our country, and they need to learn how to exercise that opportunity, and it's not easy. I'm sure you could tell us many mistakes that, people in business make all the time. But I think it's important for us to believe in truth, justice, and the American way. And I think I've said too much. You get the last word, sir. And then I'd ask you at the end of this interview if you just stay on the line as we go to the hard break at the bottom of it.
Well, I'm glad you said what you did, because there was an article today in I think, the Wall Street Journal talking about Frederick Hayek and his book, The Road to Serfdom, in the late 40s and early 50s, where he talked about the taking of economic freedom by the government leads inexorably to the taking of personal and intellectual freedom. And we have some of those things happening now with the government overreach. And I fear the people that want the government to do everything will squash out all of our freedoms. Like Gerald Ford said, a government that's big enough to do everything for you is big enough to take everything you have away.
That's right. And I say this to people in many classes that I give in talking about our Constitution. If you don't know what rights you have, how do you know what rights you've lost? So obviously education on our Constitution. And we just celebrated, as you know, I'm sure, Constitution Day. And I always say this, and I'm sure you'd agree with me in a handshake and a smile. I'm tired of hearing about the word of abuse of democracy when people simply need to understand that we are what? A constitutional republic. And you know something, Ambassador, just like I'm sure you know, I never hear that. I always hear about democracy, and it similarly rhymes with Democrat, but maybe they don't want to say it because constitutional republic has the first few letters of the word Republican in it. But either way, that's a very important thing. I think it needs to be taught, and that's exactly what we try to do with these interviews. I want to thank you for your time, sir. If you'd stay on the line with us. That concludes this another exciting interview, as we believe, and hopefully you do too, here on the Dr. Sky Experience, talking today about American exceptionalism with none other than former United States Ambassador Francis Rooney to the Holy See, starting back in 2005, a man who knows a lot and a family which has many, many, many legacies, talking about building and creating opportunities and creating large structures. This is an interesting story. We thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us. Join us next time on this particular radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC, the crown jewel of radio. Radio station beaming itself out of New York City, the nation, and the world heard in 173 countries and all 50 states. God bless America, and thank you, Ambassador Rooney.